All right, welcome back. Now, over the course of the last few weeks, aspirants have taken to the campaign trail to sell themselves and their pledges. Now, if the politicians aren't speaking to your head or your heart, have you thought about what they're saying to your wallet? There have been promises on the campaign trail to uplift Kenyans economically, from a 6,000 shilling monthly stipend for unemployed Kenyans to a bottom-up economic framework that is anchored on a program that promotes investment and financial instruments that target millions who are unemployed, running hustler enterprises, farmers groups, and fishermen. Well, tonight we will interrogate these plans, but also paint a realistic picture of what Kenyans on the ground really need. But let's briefly take a look at what Kenyans are grappling with on the economic front. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic reversed many of the gains made in poverty reduction in the last 2 decades by pushing about 6.2 million Kenyans into poverty. And this was due to job loss and salary cuts. Well, this is the largest single slide into poverty in Kenya's history. So what does poor mean in this country? According to the World Bank, that is an individual living off of between 200 and 220 shillings a day, or roughly 6,000 shillings a month. Incidentally, that 6,000 shillings is how much 72.8% of Kenyans pay for rent on average per month. That is still out of reach for 37.5% of households during the pandemic when they couldn't make rent. Well, whether due to the lack of it or wanting to make more of it, money is no doubt a top priority for Kenyans. In a TIFA research poll released yesterday, 55% of Kenyans felt the country was headed in the wrong direction. And of that group that felt this way, the biggest reasons for them were cost of living and unemployment. Let me introduce my panel really quickly. To my closest right, Steve Biko Wafula, a market investment analyst, entrepreneur, and lawyer. Thank you for coming in. We also have Susan Lumumba, youth mobilizer in Kibra and Mathare, and also a women empowerment advocate. We also have Dr. Tom Wolfe, a political analyst at TIFA Research, and last but not least, Ruth Bolo, who is the chairperson of the International Relations Committee at the Young Democrat Union of Africa. Thank you all for joining me. So we just ran through a few numbers just to kind of give people a sense of what we're talking about when it comes to the cost of living. But before we kind of get into what the campaign promises mean and what your vote means in terms of your pocket, let me come to you, Steve, in terms of what affects cost of living? What drives it up, for instance, in terms of the factors?
First, thank you very much for having me here. Basic things that actually take the cost of living up are basically one's expenses. Yeah. If you're looking at an ordinary family of, say, 4, a couple and 2 children, cost of living in terms of their rental, cost of transportation, cost of healthcare, cost of security, cost of education, cost of buying the basic foodstuffs. So these 6 key issues, when you put them in the basket, they actually affect greatly the cost of living. It will actually go up or not. And then basically when you're looking at a macroeconomic aspect, inflation plays a key role in actually looking at how we're going to look at the cost of living. So basically, like for us in Kenya, one of the biggest things that actually driven the cost of living up has been the ripple effect of COVID. And the fact that we do not have 2021 numbers. We're looking at 2019, 2020, because now is when we're actually experiencing the real effect of COVID. Not to mention the toxic politics are actually getting into it. And then we've seen that a key number of government officers have actually quit government to actually join politics. So in terms of implementation of government policy and actually in terms of handover, everything's actually going to stall. So between now and August, there'll be nothing happening. So basically, this will actually drive higher the cost of living, because Kenyans will be struggling with how they're going to get access to capital to be able to meet their daily needs.
You know, Susan, you work in the grassroots a lot. You know, when you talk to people, do they feel like politicians are speaking their language, that they actually have a pulse on what they really feel?
Thank you, Vicky, for having me around. So, no, they don't feel like politicians are really speaking their language, but because politics in Kenya are money-driven, they'll do anything just to please that politician. 75% of Kenyans live in poverty. Poverty has been criminalized. Sometimes it's like we're begging. We're begging for these common commodities, you know, health, food, social security, education, which is our right. Most of the Kenyans know their rights, but they are being ignorant towards their rights. So it's so hard. It's so hard for a common Kenya, or rather a politician, to come and tell you that I'm going to do this for you, and gives you 50 shilling, and you chase that politician away. But if you go to the ground without money, personally, I'm an aspiring member of the County Assembly in Dandora Ward 4-5, but I'm sure that I'm not going to get the votes simply because I don't have money. But my heart is for the people. I want to work for the people. I want to give these people what they need most. It's not money. It's not the handouts that we're getting on a daily basis.
And you mentioned something really important, which I think people equate with, that's how my vote affects my wallet.
Yeah.
Just that initial transaction on the campaign trail is what people think, yeah, this is how they affect me. And after the 5 years passes, that's the next incident they have. Tom, let me come to you. You know, in terms of when you look at the numbers, cost of living, unemployment, as you saw from the TIFA research, always top priority for most Kenyans. You know, what are they saying? What kind of drives that concern beyond that?
Well, I think all you have to do is look at data from the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics, as well as surveys like ours, and you can see, you know, whenever we ask people's employment status, and we've been looking at this for, or at least I've been involved in this for nearly 20 years now. You get around 1/4 of the adult population that's completely jobless, another 10–15% doing casual labor, kibarua. And when you look at income distribution, again, survey after survey, we only have 3 or 4% who report that they're earning more than 50,000 a month. Now, we know that in the international Gini coefficient tables of inequality, Kenya is one of the most unequal in terms of distribution, not just of income, but also wealth. But the sympathy I have for Kenyan voters, and even talking to people in previous elections, or even now approaching the next one, some who say they're not going to bother, is what is the individual capacity of an elected leader to make a difference?
Right.
And here I think we have to make a distinction. Surely a president or even a governor, now with devolution, they're both, of course, held accountable and have to work with their legislative bodies, either Parliament, Senate, and the county assemblies. But for members of Parliament, MCAs, and so on, because parties do not represent really distinctive policy programs throughout, and we've seen many examples of this recently, there's a tremendous pressure on these people to perform as sort of individual, you know, ATMs. And this has become greater, really going back to 2007, when MPs gave themselves huge increases through the Kakar Commission. I mean, there was a commission set up, and former Justice Kakar, I think, was the chairman of that commission. So now that MPs are among the highest paid in the world, I think the basic salary for an MCA is over 200,000 shillings a month, and a constable policeman is getting between 30 and 40,000. And we expect these people not be corrupt when they're walking down the street and so on. So notwithstanding the important work that CDF committees do at the constituency level, as I say, the structure of competition for power at that level really propels citizens into a kind of a handout mentality. Right. This last thing I'll say, I have some wonderful photographs from the 2002 election in Coast, where I wouldn't name them or their parties, were going around, and they took me, because I was friends with some of these people, with sacks, gunias of mahindi and so on, distributing that, lesos and so on, as part of the campaigns. And there wasn't any discussion of these things of policies, it was just handouts. So that in itself works as a disincentive for the accountability that should come after the vote is cast.
Exactly.
Although the one other thing I will say, when I was doing some research in Mombasa in the 2002 election, the msemo that was going around there was kula kwa KANU, kura kwa NARC. And so the people felt very free in taking money from one party
but voting
for another one,
yeah.
which in a way is laudable if people can not necessarily be beholden
yeah.
to where they're getting something that will feed them at least for a couple of days. But this is an area that requires much more research, and I hope my former colleagues at the University of Nairobi and their post-grad, if not undergrad students, are going to take advantage of this forthcoming election to actually dig down and see in what particular circumstances different kinds of appeals
yeah.
have more accommodating or attractive power than others, and then try to explain why is this so.
Ruth, I wonder how, and Tom mentioned something really important, this whole culture, and you as well, Susan, this whole culture of handouts, right? How do we push the Kenyan voter beyond that, right? To also look at the practicality of many of these promises that are being dished out, beyond the handouts, on the campaign trail. How do Kenyans think beyond that?
I think first and foremost, thank you for having me again. When you go to the campaign trail and you give this old woman, and this is not to encourage the handout culture, but when you give her 100 shillings, and you follow her immediately after your campaign trail, you will find that this 100 shillings, she has distributed it to go and buy 20 shillings of kerosene, 10 shillings of sukuma wiki, maybe, go to the posho mill. And by the time she's going back to the house, the 100 shillings is over. And that's her meal for the day. And that's probably the only meal she has had since the last campaign trail. And so what am I saying? Kenyans are not doing this because out of a pure maliciousness. Of course, that percentage is there, but it is because of the levels of poverty that are there. Yeah. This is the only way of surviving. And if you go around, a number of them will say, if I don't make it this election, it's until the next election, so I must make sure I get something.
Right.
And so if you look at, number one, our health status, for example, and I know when we talk about the handout culture, we are meaning the extremely, the grassroots level, but I want us to talk about the middle class. Because the line between the middle class and going back to, the lower income level is one hospital bill. That's all it takes for you to actually now not have any food, have rent arrears for about 3 months, not be able to move from one place to the other. Right. And so their form of handout culture is, whereby they will, certainly ask for, or rather give certain things to you during the campaign. And the minute you get back, the list of favors you have is probably longer than the list of animals that Noah had to put into the ark. And so what happens, or rather what we need to do is try and fix the various, first of all, we need to tighten the various gaps in government. We have one of the best constitutions in the world, but our implementation is equally one of the worst. So where we are winning, we also have something similarly where we are losing. So the first thing is to tighten these gaps in government and, of course, implement our constitution to the latter. Once we've implemented these things, then you begin to see that some of the areas where or like corruption, some of these laws that hinder this corruption and some of the processes in procurement, when that is hindered, then you begin to see things are moving, things are working. So whereas I would have used a certain amount to maybe buy certain things, that amount is lessened. And so the burden on me as a Kenyan is not so much. And when you come to the campaign trail, I will want to know, how are you going to ensure that investors who are coming to my area are then able to give me a job, for example, that they won't come with their workers. Once we sort out some of these institutional issues, then Kenyans will begin to think beyond that because they'll begin to see certain changes.
Let me come to you on that, Steve, because, we see things like GDP per capita growing, we're developing, projects are being launched here and there, but we're not feeling it in our pockets, right? So that's the thing that boggles a lot of Kenyans' minds. And that whole theory of, trickle down does not work. And we've heard that on the campaign trail from one side of the political divide. But when you look at the practicality of at least the two main ones who are talking about stipends or the bottom-up economy, does it make sense? You know, will we actually see money in our pockets from such proposals?
Basically, for me, I think the first and foremost, the problem lies with the Kenyan voter.
Yeah.
No one else. And everyone else has taken advantage of how gullible we are as voters to actually be able to develop a system that works against everyone else. There is no way any of these political promises are going to work. Simple, because out of 100 shillings KRA is collecting, 57 shillings are going to pay debt. So we're remaining with 43 shillings, which will actually go into salaries and recurrent expenditure, and then infrastructure. I must give it to this government because they've done a lot of infrastructure development, a lot of roads. And I mean, if you go across the country, roads are being built everywhere. So it's a good thing. But unfortunately, we are an agrarian economy at the end of the day. We cannot eat roads. So in terms of having leaders with foresight, we lack leaders who have a vision. We lack leaders who understand the needs of the people, and we lack leaders who are actually able to actually fight for the people, because we needed leaders who can actually put agriculture, manufacturing, agro-processing, security, healthcare, education first. Then look at how do we build infrastructure around this. So you need to build roads where connecting farmers to the market, connecting doctors to their patients. That is what we need. But the biggest problem we have is we are electing the worst of us and expecting them to have best vision for us, yet they don't have. So first and foremost, we need to actually just look at ourselves, because it doesn't matter whether I'm going to be given 6,000 shillings per month. It will not be feasible. Out of the 100 shillings KRA is collecting, 60% is going to debt repayment. The other 30% is going into recurrent expenditure. And mark you, our population is increasing. So in terms of healthcare, we're actually reeling from COVID ripple effect. So we're yet to fully recover. We've just implemented a very chaotic education system, which is actually very, very expensive, and it's actually bringing in problems. Devolution on its own aspect is not cheap. And given how this election is going, it's going to be very expensive in terms of poll, going to court and things like that. So at the end of the day, no single promise is actually going to be fulfilled. And to make matters worse, when you listen to the politicians, it's about, oh, huyu hatumtaki, yeye ni mwizi. Oh, huyu hatumtaki, yeye ni mzee. No one is looking at the growing number of youth who are jobless. We're churning out millions of young people every year from universities, from TVT. If you look at NYS, we have young people who are paramilitary trained. Once they finish the training, they have no job to get. And it's not the role of government to give us jobs. It's the role of government to create a conducive environment for job creators to thrive. And if you look at this current administration, it's killed all job creators. I mean, that is another story we can actually have. How many job creators are we having right now? We have none. So you have no politician talking about unemployment. You have no politician talking about basic needs for a household. Even forget the informal sector. Let's just come to middle class. How many of them are having 3 meals a day? At a standard home for middle class, they're only having breakfast and supper. Lunchtime ni kujipanga. And as she's put it, we are one hospital bill away from poverty. And it's actually very bad, because we've seen insurance companies refusing to pay for chronic diseases like HIV or COVID or cancer. And this is a side effect of poor policy. Because if you look at the kind of parliament we have, no single policy has actually been approved. If you look at agriculture, the climatic changes are not favoring Kenya. Food security is actually a key concern. Insecurity has gone up. Increasing unemployment. Actually, in Africa, we should be the 3rd highest in terms of unemployment. Nigeria, South Africa, then us. And no one is actually talking to the young people and telling them to do jobs. And if you look at the thriving sectors, we're looking at service sectors only. And this is because government is spending, politicians are spending. After August, no one will be spending. Now we'll be looking at manufacturing, it's actually dropping. Agriculture, nothing is happening. Tourism, because of COVID, things are not doing very well. Construction, nothing is going on. So basically, no politician will be able to keep the promise, because the money collected by KRA, it's already been accounted for.
So yeah, let me come to Susan on that. You know, you said no one is talking to the youth, though they're the ones who are populating those campaigns because they have no jobs to go to. Susan, when you talk to them, what are they actually saying, you know, in terms of what they need? We know jobs is a big thing for them, but beyond that, you know, Steve said we can't eat roads.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's be practical. What do they actually need?
Okay, what these youths need probably it's job, but now because they can't get it, they're only looking for something that they can get at that particular time. If you can give me something right now that I can eat or that I can do so that I can get something for myself, then that is okay for me. Which, for me, I feel, I don't know how to put it, because I really wouldn't want to also blame the youths on poor leadership and everything, because when we talk about policies to be implemented, and definitely there's nothing they can do. So if we keep saying that, you know, we youths, we are the ones making wrong decisions because of this and this, it's because these politicians have made this space be it like it is for now to us. I would want to, like, what was this point I wanted to say? Like, when it comes to election promises, whatever we are being promised right now, personally, I feel like the 6,000 promise that we're being told, it could be practical, but only if we are serious, if Kenya becomes serious, because we are one hell of a joke, of a joke country. We have money. Kenya has money. At the end of the day, we have money. But the people who are going to be given this role of implementing this, this promise,
of hopeless situation. So the people you voted in cannot implement the policies they're supposed to help you. Yeah. Honestly, are there any other alternatives in terms of democratic participation beyond voting? Because if that doesn't seem to be the key to the change we need to see, what else can people do?
That's a very big subject. We don't have a couple of weeks to discuss that.
Well, just a couple of minutes, but if you could try to.
So I'm not sure from the point of view of citizens. I mean, I do recall, I mean, your question reminds me that 15 years ago, when there was all this national civic education going on leading up to the 2010 Constitution, I remember talking with the donors who were funding it and looking through the curriculum. There was almost nothing of an economic nature. It was all political rights, human rights, of his brand garments in the Athi River Export Processing Zone. But he had an investigation done and found that there were a lot of illegal imports coming in with his brand on the clothing. And he was here for about 10 days. He was unable to get audience with responsible people in the government, and he pulled up and went home. So Kenyans were getting cheap garments with this brand name on it, but the people who'd been working in that factory lost their jobs. So if the government is not going to protect investors against illegal, counterfeit goods, then it's pointless to tell people unless they know about these stories. One other example, I remember going to get some fabric for some cushion covers on Biashara Street some years ago, and some Kikoi type of, and I, this stuff used to come from Rivatex and so on. I mean, all Kenyan. And I asked an African woman, a Kenyan woman who was in one of these stores, where is all this stuff coming from, all of your materials? She said, these days it comes from China. Big, big containers. Nothing is Kenyan anymore. And she didn't have the kind of kikoi I wanted, so I walked down the Biashara Street, and I saw two shops with Chinese people in there actually selling the stuff. And I went back to her, and I asked her about this. She said, no, I'm not trying to shame the Chinese. These people were here legally. They had work permits.
Right.
In fact, I asked later the Minister of Immigration. He said a lot of work permits were given out in Beijing from the Kenyan embassy. He didn't even know what was going on. So there's some structural issues. One other thing I want to mention, structure, and I know this is sensitive and people say it's a Kizungu thing, but that's population growth. When I first came to Kenya as a young person, there were about 10 million Kenyans. Now there are 50 million. Institute of Security Studies projects that by 2030, there are going to be 66 million. We have not had any significant increase in the proportion of Kenyans who've got regular formal sector jobs. Right. And as my friend, the late Professor Katama Mkangi, explored in his doctoral research and his dissertation, something that we all know, but he really delved into it. Poorer people tend to have larger families. And yet there is no tax or other incentive in terms of support for education and so on to try to encourage especially poor Kenyans, to have fewer kids. They play, as he described in his dissertation, this Russian roulette. If I have 10, maybe one will hit the jackpot and then take care of all of us. But that just drives people deeper and deeper into poverty when a majority of Kenyans are still depending on natural sources of water, natural sources for cooking fuel, that's firewood, and of course land for their shambas. And when you have that kind of pressure, and you don't have job creation, because now in globalized free trade, you can't have protected national industries to stop cheap imports, whether it's sugar or whatever it is, clothing and so on. So it's just a kind of a vicious cycle, and I'm not really sure if either the individual politician or the individual voter can be blamed for this situation in which people are so desperate for handouts.
I mean, Ruth, is it that much of a quagmire, as Tom has said? You know, rotten politicians, rotten voters, right? So how do we remedy this situation? The last word kind of goes to you as we wrap up.
Thank you. Allow me to touch on what some of the panelists have talked about. I think Steve spoke about the infrastructure and its role. And I feel like we are sort of doing things backwards, or rather, the issue we have is so deep that we can't appreciate something like infrastructure. Because ideally, if we were practicing agriculture as a farmer, I would be happy that the road in my area has been made, because now, whereas, brokers, for lack of a better word, would not be able, or distributors would not be able to come get my goods, now they can. So then they're able to, the access to the market is there. So unfortunately, because we're not practicing agriculture as much as we used to, then we have an issue. We are not incentivizing, private sector, which is the major stakeholders in the manufacturing industry. So then what begins to happen is, even when government or the institutions make a step forward, we don't recognize it because it is not affecting us positively, whereas in normal situations it would. Kenya is the highest labor market, right, or the largest labor market for that matter. But you've just run a story where we have one of the Kenyans who is stuck, dead, in Saudi Arabia, whereas if we flip the situation around and it was a US citizen in Kenya, there would be chaos. Yeah. There would be chaos, and every single person in Kenya would be running up and down. But here, I mean, it's one of the very many stories that we've had. And so I think it's not much of a quagmire. If you look at these elections compared to last elections, yes, the culture of handouts is still there. But the one thing I will say, having gone around the various counties the past couple of months, is that Kenyans are saying, yes, I will eat your money because I need it. But I'm not going to vote for you because your track record looks like this. I am not going to vote for you because of A, B, C, and D. The only challenge is the belief and the trust that my vote will actually count, because we have the major stakeholders actually saying in different platforms that, we know what we did in 2017. What was that? Yeah. We have them saying that, there's a certain law that BBI might come back, that this and this might happen. So as a young person, as a woman, as an old person, my question then will be, is my vote going to count? Because even if you talk to the politicians, if you talk to the aspirants, they will tell you that sometimes when you're on phone, before you hang up, you hear the electorate who has called you to tell you that, I have gathered people for you to speak, because that's what they say. They say, I have people here and they want to talk to you, and so send money for soda or something, because mobilization has become the biggest tender. Yeah. So before you hang up, you'll hear them saying, I love this woman, I really like this woman. We must vote for her. But for now, it is our time to eat. So let her send us the money. There are no people, but let her send us the money. So there is a small change, but this is not like a switch. It's not something that will change tomorrow. Right. It's something that is very, very progressive. And so we are not at a very bad place. We are not where we were at 10 years ago. The only challenge is that we are very fixed, and we have a perception that nothing is changing. I mean, if he's saying 15, 20 years ago, people were saying, kula kwa this party and kura kwa this party. It's the same thing we are saying right now. Yeah. So the more things change, the more they stay the same, unfortunately.
Well, let us see if August 9th will be any different from other election cycles, but that is all the time we have. Tom, I see you're itching to say something, but we have to wrap it up here. Steve, thank you, Susan, Tom, and Ruth. Hopefully we can continue this on next week, but keep the conversation going on social media, #VotersHub, and of course at Vicky Rubadiri. Let's take a short break here on Citizen Weekend. We'll be back with more.